Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to the 44th Forum on Tolerance, Black Lives Matter, the U.S. Journey to Justice and Healing. We're honored tonight to have Ricky Grant Jr. as a speaker. In a moment, my friend and colleague, Michelle Cubelli-Harris, will give his introduction. Michelle is our Senior Special Programs Coordinator from the Office of Student Engagement, as well as a coordinator of a very important program that Ricky's spoken at before, MAILS, which stands for Men Achieving Leadership, Excellence, and Success. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, whom I've worked with last summer as part of our MAILS program. Ricky Grant Jr. is a native of Boston, graduated from Northeastern University with a Bachelor of Science degree in organizational leadership, and has over 17 years experience in program and curriculum development, teaching, case management, grants management, and supporting programs for underserved communities in Boston. Ricky currently serves as the Chief of Community Engagement for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. He has managed various programs over the years that recruit, train, and empower community residents. Ricky also maintains a strong relationship with community organizations, educational and faith-based institutions, city agencies, and law enforcement entities to coordinate quality services for young adults and formerly incarcerated citizens returning home to society. Before joining the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, Ricky served as the Director of Youth Options Unlimited in Boston. YOU is a youth workforce agency serving 16 to 24-year-old proven risk young adults in career readiness and private job placement under the Mayor's Workforce Development Office. In 2012, Ricky founded and served as executive pastor of Rescued Church in Boston, a local church in the Dorchester community. He also directed Talent Search Program, a federally funded educational and workforce training program serving first-generation Americans aspiring towards secondary education at Roxbury Community College. Thank you so much for being here, Ricky.
Thank you, Michelle. Do you guys hear me okay? Okay, awesome. So again, I just want to reiterate to everyone, my name is Ricky Grant Jr. So grateful to be here with you tonight. Just want to start again by just saying thank you to Michelle. Michelle and I connected through a mutual friend a couple months back. She gave me an opportunity to come and speak at the MAILS group. It was awesome. The young adults who are a part of it were super engaged. And so I'm excited to be back. I want to just thank all of the North Shore staff for having me, President Bryant. I just want to say thank you again to you, sir, for allowing me to come in, and all the staff who have been a part of putting this together. Thank you very much. So two quick points before I start. I will not be as funny or as articulate as Dr. Eric Dyson, but what I do hope is I hope to add to our perspective. All of us are growing people. We are evolving people. Hopefully, as we come on and come upon new information, we evolve and we grow. And so I just hope to add a piece to our perspectives already, which are already so large and already so full of so many things. And so I just want to just thank you again. The title of this conference, of these 3 to 4 days where you all have been gathering. And first, let me just say to the students who are on here, hello, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate you guys. Black Lives Matter, the journey towards healing. I love that. When Michelle sent that to me, I loved it because we talk a lot about the issues, but we don't talk a lot about solutions, right? We can get into what's wrong, and we don't talk a lot about how do we move forward. And so I'm excited about being a part of a conference that's talking about healing. And my topic tonight is the criminalization of Blackness. And so we'll dive right into it. As we consider the times we're living in the state of Black lives in America, I pause. As we ponder and wonder and reimagine our country as one that is healed and unified, we must understand and acknowledge the cancerous diagnosis that has us where we are right now. Now, when we experience pain, a lot of us, right, we'll call our physicians, we'll call our PCPs, and we'll schedule an appointment. That's probably all of us except my late father, Ricky Grant Sr. My dad did not believe in hospitals. He did not bring me to hospitals very frequently. A little bit of my story, I remember distinctly being 6 years old. I remember being in my grandmother's backyard. And my grandmother had a tub in the backyard, like a bathroom tub. You know how sometimes you don't know where to put the trash and it just goes in your backyard. So I'm in the backyard, I'm 6, I'm running around my cousins, and there's a nail protruding from the tub, right? And of all the kids who are gonna run into this tub, is gonna be me. I'm the clumsy one, I'm gonna fall over, and sure enough, a ball rolls under and I go to reach for it and the nail, it goes right into my head. And so clearly this would be a moment where you would take your son to urgent care, right? Like, you're a responsible parent, you love your child, you bring your child to urgent care, hopefully. That didn't happen with me, right? I probably need a tetanus shot so that I don't turn into a mutant, but that didn't happen for me. And I'm still traumatized by the fact that my father would not take me to my PCP to make sure I was okay. I'm still traumatized by that, but I digress. All of us, anytime we have an ailment in our body, if it's a mental health issue, if it's a physical issue, right, we're going to reach out to our PCP. And the first thing that we want, right, before any treatment plan is developed, we seek to understand the origin and the exact nature of the pain or discomfort that we are experiencing, right? If we go into the doctor's office, right, we don't want the doctor to first pull out a scalpel. No, take my blood pressure, take some blood from me, maybe run a couple x-rays, right? Like let's do some inspection to figure out exactly what the problem is. Right? Before you give me a treatment plan, I want to know. And all of us, there are times when I've had pain where I'm an athlete, I've broken bones, and I wanted to go. And when I got to the doctor, I wanted to know, tell me the source of the pain. I want to know exactly why my body is experiencing what it's experiencing. And depending on the kind of pain that we experience, our PCP might ask us about our sleep patterns. We might be asked about the food that we've been eating lately, or we might be asked if we've had an injury recently that we've endured. Right, but the purpose of the assessment is to uncover the source of the pain in order to put a treatment plan in place that will facilitate a full recovery. When we talk about healing, healing is hard work, y'all. Healing is not easy work. Healing is hard work. And a part of the reason that healing is hard work is because it requires introspection. When we talk about relational healing, when we talk about healing as a society, we're talking about the work of doing introspection and dealing with my perspective and dealing with my prejudices and maybe dealing with my racism. Like the work of healing and us coming together and being a unified, healed society means that all of us have work to do. It's not just white brothers and sisters who have work. All of us have work to do, right? Because the guys might have some work to do in their masculinity, right? We might have some white brothers and sisters who might have to work on some racism. And some of us, even who are of color, might have to deal with our prejudice. But all of us have work to do if we're really, really going to be the society that we talk about and the society that we want. All right? And so my topic tonight, again, is the criminalization of Blackness, right? And often a topic like this can start with abhorrent data points, like the likelihood of a Black man spending time in prison at some point in his life is currently around 1 in 3, right? For our Latino brothers, it's 1 in 6, and for our white brothers, it's 1 in 17, right? And although Black people only make up 13% of the U.S. population, Black people make up 40% of those who are incarcerated. Right. And when we hear those numbers, sometimes we hear those numbers so frequently that they don't have the impact on us that it should have. Like it doesn't stagger us or make us pause or make us say, wait a second, something is truly, truly wrong. Right. Truthfully, those numbers, though, they're just the outworking and the consequence of a story that America's been telling about Black people since the very inception of this country. And tonight we're going to talk a lot about storytelling, because one of the things that we'll see in our country is that a lot of our policies, they derive from the stories that we tell, in particular about Black people. If Black people are dangerous, if Black people are scary, if Black people are savages, right? We're going to see that there are policies and laws that have been enacted and have been passed, right? Even when we look into our Constitution, there are things that have been said and been done and laws that have been passed, policies that have been passed in this country because of a lie that we believe about Black people. Okay, let's continue. And so for centuries, Black and brown people in this country, they've been commodities. We've mostly been commodities, properties used for goods and services. One of my favorite professors when I was in school, we had to read his book, Professor Howard Zinn, Dr. Howard Zinn. The book that he wrote that really impacted me was a book by the name of A People's History of the United States. And he did work to go and gather journals and personal accounts of Native American brothers and sisters, African brothers and sisters throughout from the late 1400s, right? All the way through slavery, right? And to get personal stories and personal accounts of what people were experiencing. And he was also able to get his hands on some of Columbus's journals. And so again, as we think about Why has blackness been criminalized in this country? We have to start at the very inception, right? We can talk about the data points, but it started before then. We've been hearing a narrative, and we've been told a narrative since we were children about Black people. And if we're really going to heal, we're going to have to understand what that is, and we're going to have to start telling the truth. We're going to have to start telling some different narratives, right, that bring about some equity and bring about some love and some harmony and some humanity amongst all of us. And so this is an excerpt from A People's History of the United States. And this is an excerpt when Columbus arrives on America, and the Arawak Native Americans come out to the shore to meet him. And this is what he writes. Again, this is from Dr. Howard Zinn. And I'm going to read this excerpt. It says, "They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would be fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and do whatever we want." Right? So Black and brown people in this country, right? The moment the Europeans laid eyes on us, we've always been seen as property, always been seen as second class, always been seen as slaves or those who should be subjugated, always. There's another excerpt in that same book, right? This is moving forward now. We know that the first Africans arrived in Virginia, Jamestown in 1619, but listen to this excerpt here, right? So this is, I'm going to read it to you. In the year 1610, a Catholic priest in the Americas named Father Scandival, right, wrote back to a church functionary in Europe to ask if the capture, transport, and enslavement of African Blacks was legal by church doctrine. A letter dated March 12th, 1610, right, from Father Scandival gives the answer. He responds, he says, "Your Reverence writes me that you would like to know whether the Negroes who are sent to your parts have been legally captured. To this I reply that your Reverence should have no scruples on this point, because this is a matter which has been questioned by the Board of Conscience in Lisbon, and all of its members are well learned and conscientious men. Nor did the bishops who were in Cape Verde or here in Luando, all learned and virtuous men, find fault with it. We have been here ourselves for 40 years and have been for 40 years, and there have been among us very learned fathers. Never did they consider the trade as illicit. Therefore, we and the fathers of Brazil buy these slaves for our service without any scruple." Right, so even before we get here, the view on brown people, Black people, African people, Native American people, right, has been that they're property. They're property, right? And it's amazing to me how in this country we still celebrate a day like Columbus Day, right? When my parents divorced, my dad remarried, and his wife was Puerto Rican. My dad is from Honduras. And I remember I've had so many conversations with my stepmom about how Puerto Ricans, how so many people from Puerto Rican heritage, how much they held Columbus in high regard, right? Because we're all told the stories growing up that he discovered America and he's this incredible guy. But really we know now from history that Columbus was a terrorist. He was literally a terrorist. He was an international terrorist. Right? And we can see that the ideas that he had about how he could subjugate these people, when we look 160 something years later, that attitude, right, is in the Americans, right? That attitude is here. And that attitude is in the way that we think about the Africans, right? So it's no wonder the ratification of the Constitution in 1778 didn't acknowledge Black people as citizens. How could it? We've been slaves already for 169 years. I want you to think about that. Like when our founding documents came into being, Black people had already been slaves for 169 years. So if we're going to ask the real question around why has Blackness been criminalized, we got to go back to the beginning. Because if we just start with the data points and the anecdotal stories, right, we're going to miss it. If we start with Breonna or George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks, we're going to miss it. This has been going on from the beginning. And the reason why it's been going on is because there's a lie that's been told that Black people are not human, that we're not human like everybody else, that we are savages, we are dangerous. when we got ripped from where we was and brought here. It's amazing how we become the monster in the story when really we've been the victims in the story. And I got to be honest with you guys, the Constitution for me, and it was funny listening to Dr. Dyson talk about this last night, but the Constitution for me as a Black man, it terrifies me, guys. It literally terrifies me. I think about President Trump's recent nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court, right? And when I think about that, and I think about the reason why, in fact, I've watched a lot of Judge Amy Barrett's interviews that she's been before the Senate. I like her. I think she's smart. I think she's smart. I think she's tough. But the conservatives are so excited about putting her in place because they view her as an originalist, right? And so Barrett is of the school of legal thought known as originalism, which emphasizes rigorous adherence to the text of the Constitution and the intentions of those who brought it into being, right? In its unusual building, this approach sounds unassailable. Who wants judges to ignore the words of the Constitution? Who wants judges to effectively legislate from the bench according to their own thoughts or whims, right? In the 1950s, right, the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Earl Warren banned racial segregation in public schools. William F. Buckley's conservative magazine National Review called the decision an act of judicial usurpation that ran patently counter to the intent of the Constitution. In some respects, that was true, but it was also the right decision. Chief Justice Warren was vilified on the right as long as he was on the bench. But where would we be without the Warren Court? Before it acted, states were free to ban interracial marriage, impose poll taxes that disenfranchise African Americans, forbid the sale of contraceptives, and violate the principle of one person, one vote. Police didn't have to inform suspects of their rights, and evidence seized in illegal searches could be used in court. It's only been in recent decades that the court has held that the Constitution forbids discrimination on the basis of sex. Not until 1996 did it decide that state universities can't ban women. Almost everything Ruth Bader Ginsburg achieved in her celebrated life came about because the court departed from originalism. And so I bring this up because it's such a hot topic right now. But when you think about the Constitution being written, Black people weren't thought about as citizens. We weren't even considered. We weren't even considered. I'm going to talk more about this later, but there's an interview that Dr. Martin Luther King does. It's 1967. It's 11 months before he's going to pass. He's at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And he's asked this question, you know, it's an ignorant question, but I'm glad the question was asked because we get the recorded response. But he was asked, why have Black people not been as successful as other immigrant populations who've migrated to America? And you can see Dr. King's bewilderment a little bit by this question. And he says, well, there's only been one immigrant population who've ever been slaves on this soil. Only one. Black people. Then he said, but let's go further. When we get to the Emancipation and Proclamation and the slaves are released, where do those hundreds of millions of acres of land go? Where does it go? It goes to the poor European, right? So even after the Emancipation and Proclamation, it's not like the slaves are given land, and that's why we have indentured servitude. It's just another example that really at every turn, we have been brutalized. We've been brutalized, right? And when you think about, you know, it's crazy when you think about Judge Amy Barrett possibly becoming a lifetime Supreme Court judge, right? And she's someone who openly says, I'm an originalist, man. I don't even think that the Constitution should be touched. I don't think its intent should be modified. See, that makes me nervous because I'm a person of faith, right? And in this country and around the world, we know the Christian faith and the Muslim faith and the Jewish faith. Those are three of the largest and most predominant faiths that we know. Each of those religions hold their sacred text, right, as divine. Don't touch it, don't alter it, don't anything. And America seems to hold the Constitution, right, very much in the same way. Now, again, we don't want to be loose with it, right, because that's what gives us a framework as a government. But when we've had people who weren't even thought about as human beings in our original document that founds us as a government, there's much work to be done, much work to be done. And so this, the great author and activist James Baldwin, this is one of my favorite quotes. He says, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my humanity and right to exist." I butchered that. I want to give it to you again because it sounds so good when it's said the right way, right? He said, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my humanity and right to exist." We all have our political preferences, right? We all have our political preferences. We have our values and ideologies that we hold tightly to. But where we stand on the issues of Black Lives Mattering is not an evaluation of our politics, but it's an illumination of our humanity. I want to say that again, right? Like where we stand on the issues of Black Lives Mattering, regardless of what party we identify with, right? And I love the way that Dr. Dyson said it last night because he talked about Black Lives Mattering too. And I want to emphasize that because I realize that something that's been lost in translation when we say Black Lives Matter is that some people interpret it as only Black Lives Matter. No, we're saying that Black Lives Matter as well. Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter. Black lives want to matter just as much as every other lives matter. And so we can have our political preferences, we have our ideology, we have our values, but where we stand on this issue right now, it's not about an evaluation on our politics. It really illuminates our humanity, right? Like there are political issues that we need to talk about, and then there are issues of humanity. And if we just take a quick cursory through history and we look at what's happened with Black people being criminalized, Black people have been brutalized at each and every step. Our Native American brothers and sisters have almost been extinct in this country. It's like that. It's that bad. And the reason why we've got to spend time with the diagnosis is because this is what I found. I found that often what makes us move and what makes us get involved is discomfort. Right, is that the truth smacks us so hard in the face that we say to ourselves, I cannot remain apathetic. I can't remain unengaged. I must do something. It doesn't matter my age, my gender, my color, right? When we're looking at groups of people in our country who are not just marginalized in theory, but marginalized in reality, right? Cut off from access and opportunity. We have a responsibility as people and human beings to be involved. Like we don't get to just be spectators and think that our humanity is still intact. I was on a panel the other day, and there was a young brother who was on there with me, and he said that he's in his young 30s, probably 30, 31, and he said in his generation, people aren't moved by what their ancestors have done. That's not what moves the needle for them. What you have to appeal to for them is that if they don't get involved in the civic process, how they are going to be impacted individually. And I had to push back on him. We live in such an individualistic society. I'm like, no. I'm going to appeal to the fact that there are people before us, white, black, green, and red, who have died for the progress that we have made together as a country. White people, black people, Asian brothers and sisters across the board who have said, no, I'm not going to stand by. No, I'm not going to accept this. And even if it costs me my life, I am going to fight for the equity of all of us. And I speak the way I speak and with the passion because we've got to get a fire that's under us that does not allow us to be comfortable while Black lives are exterminated, right? And this is true of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, right? And I love that Dr. Dyson last night talked about what our women in this country still go through when you talk about what they're paid. There are a number of things that are going on right now, right, that are calling us to be involved. And we don't just get to kind of be passive or not involved and then still think that our humanity is intact. No, and to me, right, the reason why I don't want to appeal to your individualism, but I do want to appeal to your humanity is because that gets to the very core of who we are. Who am I that I'm okay or have an argument for the fact that Rayshard Brooks gets murdered? Did you guys see that? Did you guys see the way that Rayshard Brooks died, right? He's inebriated. Many of us on here have been that way, right? He's inebriated. He's in his car. When the police arrive, the car is stationary. It's stationary. They wake him up. They bring him out the car. And then there's a conversation that goes on for about 6 minutes between Rayshard Brooks and this officer. And Rayshard Brooks is like, sir, I will walk. My sister lives right over there. I will walk. The only thing I don't want to have happen tonight is I don't want to die. if you guys haven't seen it, you don't, just go watch the conversation, because the cop has no give at all. He's like, hey, you want to take a breathalyzer? Will you take a breathalyzer? Will you take, he knows the guy's intimidated. He knows he's afraid. He knows he's uncertain, and he's bullying him, right? Because this guy's not a human being. This guy doesn't deserve respect. He doesn't deserve dignity. So I'm going to push this guy, right, until he does something that gives me the justification to kill him, right? So then, afraid, he decides, okay, fine, I'll take the breathalyzer. Takes the breathalyzer, and the cop comes over with cuffs. Now, in context, remember that it's just a week out from George Floyd dying. So when the cops come to put the cuffs on Rayshard Brooks, you want to know what I would have been feeling as a black man? I would have been petrified. I would have literally been terrified, guys. I would have been afraid to get in the car. I would have been afraid to get driven away. And I would have thought, I'm not going to make it until tomorrow. So he panics. He panics. He reaches for the taser. We kind of see some scrum on tape. And then we see Rayshard Brooks running in that direction. We hear him get tased. Then we hear bang, bang, bang. He's running in the opposite direction. But he's so dangerous as a black man, because this is the stories that we tell y'all. This is why when we get to the part of this conversation where we talk about, well, what should we do? We need to tell the truth. We need to tell truthful stories, because this whole idea that black people are dangerous. Listen, only black people are dangerous enough to run in the opposite direction and be a threat to you. So much so that you got to pull out your gun and kill them. Who else is that threatening? Who? No one. Only us. Michael Brown was running in the opposite direction and they killed him. See, because what we have to understand, if we want to heal, then we need to understand that the problem is this lie that lives under the surface of our pleasantries and our politeness and our political correctness, and it's that black people are second. People of color are second, and they're not. And we need to resist that, right? Organizationally, systemically, personally, with everything we have, or we're not serious about healing. See, because this conference, like I said earlier, I'm excited because we're talking about how do we heal. So if we're going to heal, then the work of introspection has got to be deep and ongoing and ongoing. One of the things I do want to say, one of the things that really helped me, to talk to my white friends, my non-black friends about race was the conversation around masculinity. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, the term toxic masculinity came up. And when it came up, I remember for me, I was kind of offended. Probably like a lot of guys, right? I'm like, I got a mom, I got a wife, I got 3 daughters, I got 6 sisters. Don't tell me about femininity. My masculinity is fine, right? And then I sat with some sisters and I listened to them talk to me. I listened to sisters from the age of 16 into their 50s talk about how nervous they had been walking past groups of men, what it was like going to the car, things that I'm a guy, I'm 6'2", 6'3", I'm 280, guys. I eat a lot, right? My wife's trying to get me to eat less, but I eat a lot. Like, I'm not afraid a lot of times of someone can literally overpower me, right? Like, I got to figure out how to respond the right way right now to survive this moment. See, when I started to hear that, you know what I heard? What we go through. I started to hear the similarities of what black people go through, whether I'm going on a job interview or I got to interact white people in this way, and as a big guy, right? Like, I'm not always in a suit and a tie. I love my hoodies. I love my Timberlands. I love my Nikes. Y'all feel me? Like, I'm 38. Like, but when I walk into the store with those clothes on, I'm very, very, very aware of where my hands are, what I'm doing, how I'm moving. Like, I've been so conditioned to not make people feel uncomfortable because it could mean my demise, right? Like, we've got to change that. Like, that cannot be the environment with which our black boys and our black girls grow up in. And none of us, regardless of our color, should be okay with it. That cannot be okay. We've got to have an environment and a society that welcomes all of us And one of the things that we're going to have to do, and remember, I just wanted to just add something to your perspective, is that we're going to have to be truth tellers. Those who create space, especially to the students on here, though, like we are those who create safe space for people for people to come in with diverse viewpoints and to have conversation, right? Like the conversations need to take place, right? There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration on every side of every issue. But if we're going to be healers, then we're going to have to be those who are able to create environments where people can come in and have meaningful conversation and meaningful dialogue and process what's happening, right? Because the person who we call racist, if there's a person who's a racist, right, a lot of that started in their childhood probably, right? Just like a lot of things for me that I'm still working through. I can look back to my childhood and say that started back at 5 and 6 and 7. And so I can't be asked one day to, like magic, change, but I can work. So in the same way that I'm working in the masculinity thing is the same way that those of us who have our prejudices or may detect racism, we can work on it because all of us have work to do. Is that good? Does that make sense? Right? And so, the reason why I brought up the MLK story is because the reason why the interviewer asked him that question is because the story is Black people are lazy, right? Like there's these stories that we just got to deconstruct and say, stop, untrue, right? So the first story was Black people are property, they're second-class citizens, they're made for subjugation, they're made to build a whole society on, they're just less than human. So that's the story we've been going with for a long time. And then during Jim Crow, it's they're lazy. It's they're lazy when you free it from slavery after 200 plus years and give us no land. And so that was why MLK had to say to him, do you know that the only immigrant people group who've been slaves have been Black people? And then when land was being given out in the handfuls, we couldn't get our hands on it. So don't ask me no questions about, like, economically, we've been brutalized. And the reason why I like to bring up these different angles is because when we get to the end of this, hopefully, I'm sure probably all of us here are involved in social justice in some way. But for those of us maybe who are on the fence or are pondering, there were so many issues that we can get involved in, right? There are a plethora, a Rolodex of issues that we can choose from to say, you know what, this one, I'm passionate about this. I want to get involved. Or this one, as the conference was going on, this one really pricked me. I want to get involved with that. I'm going to go see what's in my area, what's in my neighborhood, what's happening on campus. I want to be involved, and we should be involved. When we think about mass incarceration, right? The policies and laws often derive from the stories we tell. And so a quick cursory, when we think about the war on crime, when President Lyndon Johnson talked about the war on crime in 1965, right? There was a story being told that Black people are dangerous. They're dangerous. And we've got to do something about this. And we've seen these presidents campaign on a brother. There was a brother who had raped a white woman, and an entire campaign of law and order was ran on that one fact. One, right? So war on crime and the way it devastated the Black community was a story that was told. It morphed into a policy. It morphed into a law, but first it was a story. First it was some rhetoric. First, it was some talking, right? And so it's at that level. So yeah, we got a lot of things that we're trying to reform. We got amendments that we're trying to make here in Boston. There's some police reform stuff that the mayor recently announced, and we're thankful for announcements. And we're going to be looking for follow through on what concretely is going to take place, right? But we're talking stories, y'all. When we talk about the war on drugs, 1971, President Nixon, that was a story that was told. There's a brother by the name of John, I forgot how to pronounce his last name. It starts with a U. He was one of President Nixon's aides. And he's come out a couple of years ago and said, we knew we were lying. We knew we were just spinning the story on the news. We knew we were just stirring it up. Right? But at that point, it was politically expedient for us to do so. But that's not political, y'all. That's inhumane. And we need to separate very distinctly our humanity and our politics. right? Like we should be able to respect each other, get along regardless of where we are, regardless of what we believe, regardless of what party we identify with. But all of us got to vigorously be against any of our people groups being deemed as less human than the rest of us. It just can't be so. That just can't be so. It just can't be so. When we think about the 1994 crime bill, it's not just the Republicans. Let's be real. Can we keep it all the way 100? It ain't just the Republicans. Yo, this, lock them up and keep them under control. It sells in America. It sells in America. Keep them under control. Let's legislate them and criminalize them until we get them under control because they're out of control. Right? You tell that story enough, right? You use the media and you get these big, scary black dudes on the 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock news. People's going to be like, you sure right? We should lock them up. Good Lord, they're scary. You know, after President Clinton's 1994 crime bill, what came subsequently was the federal 3 strikes rule. We got brothers serving life forever because they were caught with some drugs. I'm not talking about drugs to distribute. I'm talking about, you know how right now there's a whole big thing going on. We're looking at the opioid addiction and we're saying people really need help. This is a public health crisis. That's not what they were saying about black people when they was finding them with drugs in the 80s and the 90s. War on crime, war on drugs. And we got guys who are away from their children, their mothers and society, right? For the rest of their natural life over being caught with drugs for personal use 3 times. I mean, that's not politics. That's not politics. That's inhumane. Straight up. Straight up. If that happened to my worst enemy, I'd be like, look, that wasn't right. Right? And so these are the stories that are told. And so when we talk about policy reform and we talk about, like, yes, we need to be engaged on that level. But the reason why we need to be engaged just on the conversational level is because these things mount into policies. The way we talk about the issues in our world, they morph in turn, and people champion those and turn them into policies. And so the reason why our brother Philando Castile is not here, when we think about Eric Gardner and Tamir Rice, he was a baby. When we think about Michael Brown and Rayshard Brooks, when we think about Breonna Taylor, these people were designated as dangerous. When Philando Castile died, you can see how nervous the officer is. You know, the way Philando died breaks my heart. But it also bothers me how nervous the officer was when he approached him. He was petrified. He was terrified of this young man, right? The way that he looked, it looked as though he felt threatened. He was afraid that maybe, and so when this brother is calmly, his hands are visible, his girlfriend is in the passenger seat, his daughter is in the back seat, he says, I have a license to carry, and still bang, bang, bang. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could not believe what I was watching. I couldn't believe it. Because in Black families, we have conversations about how to endure police interactions. And Philando did everything my parents told me to do. Speak calmly, be respectful, have your hands visible, don't reach. And he died. But the reason why he died is because that officer had been told a story about Blackness that petrified him. And it wasn't true. And it's not true. And what we're up against aren't just policies, but it's a way of thinking. There is a way of thinking about Blackness in this country, right? And you know, we're in a very much PC society now, right? And that's awesome because it keeps us in line, right? In some ways, but in another way, it allows us to kind of to glide over what the real issues are. It allows us to not get to the very root and heart of what is happening. And the heart and the root of it isn't just a policy issue. It's what we believe. It's what we believe about Blackness. And that's what needs to change. And don't get me wrong, I know it's hard. Like, you know, when I had to start doing introspection and still am on my masculinity, there were things that were there from the time that I was a child that I was taught. We don't cry. I grew up in Roxbury, y'all, right? I grew up in Roxbury in Boston. I grew up between St. Joe's and Warren Gardens. These are two Warren gangs. I went to sleep every single night hearing gunshots, every single night. So you don't get to go outside and be soft, as we called it. You don't cry. You don't do none of that because you're afraid that you might become a victim, that if you show any kind of weakness at all, that I might become a victim. And so, so you grow up in that environment and you grow up in that space. And what you start to lose is you start to lose some of your humanity. You start to lose some of your humanity. When we look at these, and I don't mean to go off on this tangent, but to me, I see the correlation. When you look at these domestic violence numbers, when you look at 1 in 4 of our girls are going to be harmed or sexually abused in some way, everyone should stop. That should stop the world, right? Like that's so incredibly alarming, and it says something about masculinity in America. Well, in the same way, when we look across every industry and we see Black people on the bottom, whether we're talking about life expectancy, or we're talking about educational opportunities, or we're talking about finances. There was a study that was done in Boston a couple of years ago. It was called "The Color of Money in Boston." The feds did it, and I always tell people, I love a good fiction. I love a good horror fiction. I love a good mystery fiction. Like, hand me a fiction, send my kids to my mother's house and let me read, right? But I would tell people that this Color of Money in Boston report that the feds came out with, I had never read a horror story like that. And just 2 quick data points that came out of that was that when you looked at the average white family in Boston and their net worth versus the average Black family, it was $247,000 to $8. Right? When they looked at the life expectancy of Black people in Roxbury versus white people who lived in the South End, and just to give you, we're talking about a mile, guys, a mile, right? We're talking about Roxbury in the South End. If you're not familiar with it, it's about a mile, and the life expectancy went from 59 to 91. I mean, it's real. Like it is real. And when you how could that be when you think about the number of things that are happening and the number of places where healing needs to happen, restoration needs to happen? You can see why something like that is happening. And so again, when we think about Philando and Eric and Tamir and Michael and Rashad and Brianna, they were the victims of a story that's been told so many times that's not true. And the truth is that could have happened to me. Could have happened to me. There was situations where I'm at a park or I'm out somewhere and cops come and thank God I was lucky enough to not endure violence from police. So in closing, I just want to talk about these 5 takeaways and then open it up for the Q&A. And I hope that this was challenging and encouraging, but mostly I hope it inspires you to do and to move. And so what does this mean? We can understand why has there been a criminalization of Blackness? It was financially expedient from the gate, right? Columbus can't find gold, but he can find people, right? And we have just continued. And what we need to do. So here's my 5 takeaways that I just want to leave with you. One is, what this means is it means we don't get to be passive about engaging civically. That we must be involved in the process. Obviously, we have an election coming up in about 2 weeks, but then we have local elections that are happening all the time. And I just want to encourage everybody on here, the students in particular, be involved. We need you to be involved. And as we think about history, we think about the civil rights movement and those young adults who are preparing themselves through purification to go sit in restaurants, to get dragged out, beat, right? Dogs sicked on them, hoses. Like, young adults have always been at the heartbeat of every movement that we've ever had in this country. And so to the students who are on here, I want to encourage you, remain engaged. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons. I see a question coming up, so we'll get to the Q&A in a little while, guys. But there's a lot of reasons why we could feel like I don't want to be engaged. President Bryant, there's a lot of reasons why we might feel like it's not working. When I looked at MLK in that interview that I referenced earlier, when he was at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he wasn't the same MLK from 5 years prior. You could tell that the journey had wore on him. You could tell that he was tired. You could tell that he was hurt. And he even says in an interview, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says that he was more hopeful when he had done the I Give a Dream speech 5 years prior, that he was more hopeful and thought things would turn around more quickly than they had. And so this is a grind. This is difficult, but we have to be engaged. We got to be engaged. And I do want to say this too to the young brothers and sisters of color who are on here. The ancestors died. The ancestors have run a faithful race for us, right? And they've handed us a world that was better than the way that they found it. And if nothing else, honoring the legacy of those who came before us and seeing ourselves as part of a collective is so critical. And that's helped me to remain engaged in times when I didn't want to be engaged, in times when I said, what's the point? What's the purpose? Why we keep going through this? It's not changing fast enough. But I had to say to my cousin the other day, me and my cousin, we get into these debates. He's a fiery guy, and he's saying how nothing's changed and nothing's gotten better. And I had to say to him, I said, in 1619, Africans arrived here in chains. Mothers separated from fathers, children from families. People raped in front of family members, taken in front of. We've come a tremendous way. And there's a tremendous way to go, but we've got to commemorate and celebrate what's already happened, so we stay encouraged to remain engaged. Number two takeaway is that we have to continue to get informed, right? Like, learning is my responsibility. I tell my kids that it's your responsibility. I tell my kids, right now we're going through, we're doing virtual learning, and so I'm telling, I have a junior, I have a freshman, and I have a 6-year-old. But the two high schoolers, I'm saying, listen, you've got to make those teachers work. Right? I know it's a little more difficult now. It's a little more, it's virtual, stuff's going on. So if you got to email them 100 times, they work for you. You email them. You press them. You make sure that it works for you. But the learning is your responsibility. We're not going to put it off on other people. Like, you need to know what you need to know because you're trying to apply to these prestigious colleges, and you need to make sure you know it. Now, I will assist. If they're unresponsive, I've sent a couple emails to teachers since the virtual learning has started, like, sir, ma'am, can you please respond to my kid's homework question, right? But it's our responsibility to be informed. We don't get to be on the wrong side because we say we didn't know. No, not in this era, not right now when the access to the information is so readily available. Number three, we should be asking the question, what is my lane? Right? Like, as it relates to bringing about equity, as it relates to bringing about humanity, as it relates to this healing journey, what is my lane? What is the thing that when it comes up, that's the thing that breaks my heart. That's the thing that I feel passion. That's when I feel the goosebumps come, right? And so there may be something around you that already exists, right? Maybe something on campus or something in the neighborhood that already exists that you can be a part of. But I want to encourage you, be a part of making our society something that's more equitable. Or coming together and talking like this is just talking. This is not enough. This is great, but this is not enough. We come together to do this. They brought one of the best speakers in the country to come, right, and speak to us so that we might be stirred to do something. Not so we can say, North Shore, wow, man, they really threw a really, really great conference. Did you hear about the conference, the Black Lives Matter conference? Oh my God, it was amazing. Did you know who they brought to come speak? That's not it, y'all. That's not the goal. The goal is I must do something. I am responsible. And that's all of us. Number 4 takeaway, we got to tell different stories. We got to tell true stories, right? We've got to tell a true story that in this country, there are ways in which we've lost our humanity, but we are fighting to regain it. That's the story. Let's stop. I'm frustrated with the education in President Bryant. I'm sure that North Shore is, I could just see that the programs y'all are doing, like, y'all are getting into it. But you can literally go through public education your entire life and hear nothing that's real or authentic about the Black experience in this country. You get to February and you get the Black History Month, and we talk about George Washington Carver, and we're going to talk about Martin Luther King, but we're not really going to touch anything. And it's the most awkward time, right, for Black students. I was in Wellesley and Metco, right? They expect me to know all the answers. I'm like, I don't know when George Washington Carver died. I'm not certain. I'm sorry. No, I'm not certain. Right? Like, it's like, oh my God, I'm supposed to have the answers. I don't. We got to tell better stories, and it starts in our own homes. It starts in the times where we think our prejudice and our racism is safe. That's where we have to change it. It's right there, right there. Now, this is beautiful in my household. I got 2 teenagers, right? So they own me about everything. Dad. I'm like, my fault. Okay, my fault. My kids is holding me accountable all the time. You're making sure I'm PC. But we need that. In the places where we live is where the conversations have to change, right? The humanity of my sisters has got to be real in my private life. Because when we try to fake it, it don't work. Because when push comes to shove, the real us comes out. 5, last takeaway, and then we can do Q&A. I know I've been going for a while. Let me see. Oh, I'm talking for so long. Oh my God, Michelle, I'm sorry. All right. 5, anytime, guys, anytime we're being asked to abandon our humanity in support of any political ideology, regardless of the party we identify with, we should pause. We should pause, and we should do some introspection, right? Like, what happens with us sometimes is we live in a very binary world, right? It's this or that. That's how we function. And it's amazing watching Republicans who work for Trump come out one by one over time and say, I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay. And I'm not trying to turn this into some debate between, whatever. We're going to vote how we're going to vote. It's coming in 2 weeks. But again, there's a difference between politics and humanity. And as we think about the election coming up, right? To me, for Ricky, this isn't even about whether I'm Republican or Democrat. I want to tell you guys this, right? Because as a Black person, I'm not that excited about either, right? Like I'm not elated about either. However, man, there seems to be a guy in office right now who is okay with the destruction of all of us on here. Right. He terrifies me. So listen, anytime we're being asked to abandon our humanity in support of a political ideology, that is the time to pause, especially to the students. I want to encourage you. That's the time to pause and say, wait a second. Listen, if there's not enough time for us to do the introspection, then don't go with it. You deserve and you have the right to pause and say, wait a second, if I go with this ideology, let me just project it out and see where it will take me. And as an academic institution, I want to encourage you to do that. So guys, that's my time. I talked a lot. Thank you. Any questions?
So it looks like there's about 4 of them in the chat already.
Okay, great.
I will start with the first one that was from President Dr. Nate Bryant, and he asked if you could say a little bit more about police reform proposals in Boston.
Yeah, so there's been a lot going on a state level and on a city level. There's been work done on cameras that would enforce officers to have to wear cameras on duty. That's something that passed recently. There's legislation being worked on right now that if someone asks for help, right, if someone says, I can't breathe, that you are now mandated to respond and give first aid. That's something that's being worked on right now. Most recently, the mayor made an announcement just about changes around equity in general that are going to be made within the Boston Police Department. Boston is an exciting place right now. Politically, there's a lot that's happening. Now, when I say that, I'm not happy about where things are generally, but there's movement and there's conversations. And so, President Bryant, to your question, lots of conversations about how our police force becomes a part of the fabric of our community. And then I got to talk about my boss, Rachel Rollins, who's the district attorney in Suffolk County. She's just not playing around. She's just not. She is determined to make sure that the criminal justice system is equitable in Suffolk County. She recently, about 2 weeks ago, released a list of about 136 names of officers whose records are not worthy of having people in prison behind your word because of corruption you've been involved with. She released 136 of those names. And I was talking with her recently, and she gets a lot of hate and threats, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, you don't like you're changing the game, and so there's going to be a whole lot of that. So, but what's happening in Boston is amazing because you have a police force that's willing to work with the DA's office, not to keep people from accountability, no, but to get officers and residents and citizens who are unsafe for all of us to accountability. So having Rachel Rollins and having Commissioner Gross at the same time, we've lucked up a lot in Suffolk County. So that's been an amazing thing. Hey, Michelle, I see you. Yep. You're muted.
I didn't think I could unmute myself. Sorry. Ricky, can you share a bit about how you view or what your perspective is of the mental health impact of the racial injustices we're experiencing right now on Black folks?
Man,
what do you
I don't want to talk
day to day?
Yeah, I think obviously people are different, are impacted differently, but I can say obviously I'm involved in a number of conversations. It's almost unreal. It's almost unreal. I would say from probably, I think we watched Philando die in 2015. I would say from then it's been just a stream of public Black deaths. And I can speak more for me. It's been, when George died, I cried, y'all. I cried for a week. And I didn't just cry for George, I cried for Bree. I cried for Sandra. I cried for Tamir. I cried. And so I had to take some time, at work, there was a lot of conversation around trying to facilitate, groups to have, I couldn't even be involved in the process, right? And I felt like I should, I'm one of the Black executives on staff and I need to be involved, but it was so painful for me that I couldn't even step into space and say, hey, let me help facilitate a conversation. Man, I was licking my wounds. I was heartbroken. I'd never seen anything like that. I think that George Floyd, I think he's probably our generation's Emmett Till. When I think about Mamie Till keeping a casket open so the world sees what has happened to her son, watching Officer Siobhan's knee on George Floyd's neck with that smirk on his face, you just can't shake it. You just can't ever forget it. And so a lot of hurting people, and it's not just Black people that's hurting. I think any of us who have a soul, if we have a soul, that broke our heart. Because even though there are other situations that happen and we might debate about the details of what transpired and why, what happened, y'all know Facebook, y'all know social media is good for that. Well, we don't know the details. I mean, we watched 8 minutes and 46 seconds of I'm going to kill you because I can. And so I think a lot of pain, lots of hurt, but at the same time too, I think it has stirred people. I think that as a society that we are awakened like we have not been probably since the 1960s. I believe that we are awake. Everyone on every side, everyone's awake. And that's a good thing because hopefully some real change comes from it. But thanks for that question, Michelle. Any other questions, guys?
Nadira, would you like to ask your question that you had in the chat?
Sure. So I asked a question in the chat. One of the things I noticed is whenever folks are calling for police reform and justice for Black lives, this argument of Black on Black crime, there seems to be a lot more interest in that. when normally there isn't. I noticed that it only becomes a huge focal point in response to calls for police reform and justice. And so I just wanted to get sort of your response to that argument that it justifies excessive use of force by police.
So Nadira, thank you for that question. So a lot of my presentation was about the stories that we tell and how the stories we tell, what it justifies. Now, we do this in our personal life all the time, but we also do it politically, right? And we do it when it comes to issues of systemic racism, where we're going to give this story that black on black crime is out of control. But we all know, when you look at the data, all people kill people who they live in proximity to, white on white, black on black, right? Like, it's across the board. But why has the black on black been coined and crystallized? Why? Well, we know why. It's the same reason why this story's been going on from the beginning, right? Like, right? It continues to tell this story that we've got to keep them under control. But really, it's about, Nadira, it's really about holding on to power. At the end of the day, it's about holding on to power. Yes, you're right. We are, but I would say that myth is being debunked. More and more and more, I hear that conversation coming up, Nadira. I hear more and more people having a conversation. Well, why is black on black coming up versus, because the data tells us a certain thing. But again, the one thing I want to highlight is look how we gravitate towards stories. Like, once we hear a story and we hear it multiple times, and then when you hear it from people you trust, right, or you hear it from what you think is a reliable source, most people won't even fact check. They're not even going to go see if it's even reliable. But it's still black on black crime, man. And what does that lend towards Nadira? They're savages. They're savages. So when we see, even though they're only 30% of the population, but 40% of them are locked up, well, then you know why we're doing that? Because look, they're savages. They're savages. And so again, our resistance is to step in and say, no, that's actually inaccurate. And again, that's why for North Shore to be putting this on as a higher learning academic institution is incredible, because this is what we should be talking about. Like, this is where we should be able to learn and be like, wait a second, I should be able to come into this space and get something, I'm paying for it. Teach me something real so I can go out in the world and actually inform and clarify, because Nadira, to your point, that's right. That is a huge talking point. But the one thing that I love about this generation, the millennial generation, and is the generation after them, Generation Z, is that right? Man, they're not playing around. My daughter told me the other day, she said, actually it was my niece. She said, Uncle Ricky, she's 16. This is sad, but it's true. She said, I've learned more about issues of race and discrimination from TikTok than I have from school. And I know they're learning, because my girls come to me all the time like, Dad, did you know? I'm like, yeah, I knew that. Dad, did you know? I'm like, yeah, I knew that. Dad, did you know? No, I didn't know that. You learn that on TikTok as well. And so this generation is awake. And hopefully as we keep pushing the envelope forward, we're able to hand them a society that's actually safe, where they feel safe to live in as women, Black people, LGBTQ, right? What we would know as marginalized communities, immigrant population, like, they should be safe. And if they're not safe, it says something about the society that we live in. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of the society that makes women feel unsafe. It says something about my humanity. And so all of us need to take responsibility, really, for the ways that we contribute to the degradation of all people groups. And we're talking about Black lives today, but you guys have seen me go and talk about different groups because it's a humanity issue, right? It's not white people are just racist or that's the problem. No, humans have, we seem to have some issues that need to get addressed, and they manifest themselves in different ways. Masculinity, social constructs, racism. And where I find myself being harmful, I need to take responsibility and deal with it. Any other questions, guys? Now, you guys have been in the conference. Y'all been hearing people talking to you a lot. So I know y'all probably tired of me, but I am so glad that I had an opportunity to come out and hang out with you guys. I hope it was helpful. So I just wanted to say that.
So we do have another question in the chat, and I said this in the chat, but I'll also say I have given everyone the permission to unmute themselves if you wanted to raise your hand to ask a question after I read this one from the chat. So this one's from Ajo, and he asks, how do you have a discussion with white supremacist All Lives Matter people, or one who strongly opposes defunding the police based on unforeseen racist ideas?
Can you ask me that one more time, Laura?
Sure. And I didn't say it, I said it quickly too. How do you have a discussion with a white supremacist All Lives Matter person, or one who strongly opposes defunding the police based on unforeseen racist ideas?
So here's what I would say, guys, right? Remember, most of the ideologies we've had for some time. They've come about as a result of being shaped by people we trust. And so when we engage in these conversations where I'm going to engage with someone who's on the complete opposite end of what I believe, I think that we have to go into those conversations knowing that this is going to be a process, right? Right now, there are times when we're engaging somebody maybe on social media or maybe in passing at a protest and we're going to have a quick conversation. Those are tougher because people have reasons why they believe what they believe, even when we disagree, right? Like people have reasons. And so when we say, if I say defund the police, right? There's a lot of people on the other side of that where that sounds dangerous to them. It's not that they're against black people. That for them just sounds like something that's not safe, right? And so to me, what I have found, when I've had to have conversations with people and we disagree, it's not one conversation. It's a series of conversations that we're having over time because here's the thing, guys. Even when we know we're right, the ability to be able to listen to someone and understand why they're coming from where they're coming from, it matters because it dignifies them. And I've learned that, particularly in touchy topics. I should be able to listen, you listen to me, I respond, and we're going to begin a dialogue. And so to the student who asked the question, I just want to encourage you, think about it as a series of dialogues, right? Where you're going to learn and they're going to learn. We know we want to get this because we believe like, hey, what I'm thinking is right. So we want to get them to a certain place. But be open and listen and keep on sharing. It's not our job to transform people, guys. It's not our job to change people. But as the opportunities arise to give truth, we do so. And we just let the chips fall where they may.
Thank you. And someone else from my community just pointed out to me that Joy had her hand raised. Joy, if you had a question you wanted to ask.
I didn't have a question, but thank you very much. This has been very interesting and very thoughtful of your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank
My
you.
wife, by the way.
Oh, yes. Look, exactly. Yeah. President Bryant. Exactly. I should have picked up on that. I see the Bryant here, but great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ricky, I just want to sort of echo what Joy has said. I just love your fire and your passion. And I really needed that tonight. I needed it today. I need it so often, but it's tough. It's really tough trying to maintain, you know, that level of passion so that we're making sure we're doing the work. And you just really, tonight was just amazing. You just, thank you. Thank you for bringing yourself and being so real with us.
Well, I just want to say to you and to the North Shore staff again, and to the students, you guys had Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, right? Like, that's serious. And to me, that shows the commitment to making sure that faculty, students, that like, we know what time it is, and we know how to live and how to be and how to move. And so me being able to be a part of that, like I'm running around telling people stuff like I'm important. I'm like, you know, I was a part of this conference. Yeah, Dr. Eric Mike, he was on there first night. I was the second night. So I get to act like I was important for 2 days. But this has been amazing. I want to continue to participate. I'm so glad that you guys are having these important conversations, and I just want to continue to help contribute.
You know, I just want to, you know, your comment about Dr. Dyson and not being able to top what he did. You know, we can debate that back and forth, but I will say this. Yes, he's world renowned. But the topic that we're discussing, you don't hold a candle to anybody. I mean, you know, he may be talking more on a larger level just because of his worldview and where he's been. But you understand the issues, and I would say it's at a more granular level, which we need. And so I would say you've got nothing. I tip your hat. I tip my hat to you, because I say, yes, Dr. Dyson is Dr. Dyson, but I'd have you back any day of the week because you kept it real and you really make it relatable. So again, I appreciate you.
You just made my night. You just made my night, President Bryant. I'm telling my wife after that. I'm like, hey, he thought I was he thought I was all right. No, thank you, sir. I internalize that and accept it. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure, really, our pleasure.
Ricky, there's a comment in the chat. Someone is suggesting that you become an adjunct faculty member.
Oh, look, I'm gonna inbox President Bryant about that. You know,
I would endorse that. I would endorse that.
Oh, listen. So now you're certainly gonna get an email from me, right? Joy. So I'm gonna really send the email just so you know everybody here heard it. I love it. You know, one of the things that it's funny I've been thinking about is for my work I work with the DA, but I love so much teaching like that more than anything. And so coming and doing these 2 workshops that I've done here has been an experience to me too, because it's I'm like, maybe I need to think about maybe doing some other things as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you very much. So any other questions? Good to go? All right. Awesome.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.